Hey students, welcome to Office Hours. I hope you guys are studying well and that you are having some fun and working hard on those phonemic analysis problems that I gave you guys to prepare for your test. So what I'm going to do for you guys is make you guys a little video going over some of these problems. We won't do all of them, but I will go over one of them in depth. We'll go over Korean. And then I will look quickly at two of the examples of Tojolabal. The goal is that you guys will have a little bit of help over the weekend as you guys are studying and reviewing the phonemic analysis problems. So first, let me say one thing kind of about the test versus what we've done in class and some of the practice problems. So the test is going to be closer to what we have done and reviewed in class. Some of these problems that I've given you, they are a little bit more challenging, and the purpose of that is to help you guys be more prepared for the test than you need to be, and to get lots of the practice doing real phonemic analysis, really thinking about some of these problems, hopefully having fun. Linguistics is all about solving puzzles and finding patterns. So if you like puzzles and patterns, this will hopefully be pretty fun. So today we're looking at phonemic analysis, and I want to remind you guys why we are doing phonemic analysis, why we're not just memorizing phonological rules and repeating them on a test. And phonemic analysis really is that process of how linguists will take data and make conclusions about a language. I want to see that you guys can do this and practice this and really apply some of the phonetics and phonology things that we've talked about in doing some of this yourself. These phonological rules are really important in our world, especially with computers, but even in English class where I am teaching you guys pronunciation rules. So the plural S, how it changes after after a p, t, k, or some other sounds, or how it changes to z after a vowel or b, d, g, or uz after a s or a z or a sh. That rule comes from phonemic analysis. If you can collect data and you can do this very same process to create rules like this in any language. So that's why we're doing it. And what we'll do is I will go over Korean in depth, since that was a more difficult, kind of confusing problem there. Then we'll go quickly over two examples from Tojolabal, the language in Mexico, spoken in Chiapas. And then I'll wrap it up and wish you guys well for your test. So thank you for listening, and I hope this helps you guys. Now let's jump into that first problem. Okay, so for the first problem, we are going to look at two sounds that exist in Korean, and o. So when we are doing this phonemic analysis, we are trying to answer one of two research questions. We are going to ask that do and o make a difference in meaning, two different phonemes, in contrastive distribution, or are they in complementary distribution? Which means, can we predict when a Korean speaker will make the or o sound? So to find that out, first thing we need to do is collect data. So here, in this case, it is given for us. We have these words here, and that we will take a look at. Now, the first step is on your separate sheet of paper, draw a T-chart listing the environment of or o. So we're going to start by doing that. We're going to make our chart. Okay, so making our T-chart right here, just like this, and the two sounds that we are looking at. So we're going to have in one line, Sorry for my handwriting here because I'm drawing this with my finger. And then ol, just like that. So now we are going to look at all of our data, and we are going to list the environments before and after we see each of these sounds. So we're going to look at the sounds that come before and after, and we're going to list those all. So I recommend that you stick to one sound and you only look for one sound. That way you know that you never miss anything. So we're going to start with So looking at the first word, we see ruby, the Korean word ruby. And we see the sound, and it exists at the beginning of the word. So that is a word boundary. And oo. So we'll write that down here in our T-chart. Word boundary and oo. Then we see in the next word here, going down over, we see in the word kiri, meaning road. So it will be so the next one will be E and E in kiri. Now going to the next one, we're going to do that for each of the times that we see the sound. Changing that up for you guys so it's easier to read. Now, going to the next one, next word that we see in is saram, meaning person. So coming down, we can see that it is between two A's. Here, moving on to the next word with we see irumi, meaning name. So, and we can see it is between an E and an U. So we type it in just like that. Next one with is right here, the word radio, or radio in Korean. And we see it is at the beginning of the word, so a word boundary that we represent with the hashtag symbol. And after it is an so we put that there. Looking in, there are no other words we've gone through with so now we will move on to ol. Okay, so now with looking at ol for the words with the ol sound, we can see the first one is mul, meaning water. So that is between u and another word boundary here at the end of a word. Next one here is pal, meaning arm. Coming down. And it's between an and a word boundary. The next one that we see, moving on, is sol. You see the ol sound there at the end of sol between u and the end of a word that we mark with a word boundary. Got my words here creeping over, so let's move that back. And then we're going to keep going for the rest. Here we have ilgo and ilbalsa. So in ilgo, it is between an E and the G sound. So between E and G. The last environment that we see the ol sound in is the word ilbalsa, meaning barber. It appears twice, so we want to record both of these because each time we see it tells us something about when this sound appears. So here in the beginning, it appears between the E and B sounds. E and B. Between A and S. Okay, so now we have found all of the environments that and ol appear in our data, and we've listed them here on our key chart. So now we need to move on to the next question, based on your analysis, what is the distribution of and so remember, the first question that we ask to determine this is to look for any minimal pairs. These are two words with different meanings that have the same sound in the same environment. So the environments listed on the left would match exactly the ones that we list on the right. That would mean that they can be in the same place and that it changes the meaning of a word. So we call that contrastive distribution. There is a difference in meaning created by that word. So let's look. Here we don't see any environments. Here we have a word boundary in oo. We see the sound. But when we have oo in a word boundary, we have ol. We don't see any time where they both appear in the same environment. So, okay, so we know that it is not contrastive distribution. So for our problems, your choices are contrastive or complementary. So we would choose complementary. It never appears in the same environment in our data. So on your test, you would then circle complementary if you see no minimal pairs. So now on the test, you need to show me that you understand what the difference between contrastive and complementary are and what they mean. So you're telling me that therefore, when we find that they're in complementary distribution, therefore, and ol are allophones of the same phoneme based on our data. There are allophones of the same phoneme in Korean. And when we say they're allophones of the same phoneme, that means that the two sounds are not mentally represented differently in the minds of speakers. They don't change the difference in meaning. They're predictable by the environment. So now, if they're predictable by the environment, we need to go back for number 4 and find the phonological rule. What pattern can we find to predict when we will see either or ol? So to figure that out, to figure out the rule, we need to go back to our data and our list of environments and figure out if there are any patterns that explain one or the other. So look at We see 2 examples in our data where appears after a word boundary and before a vowel. So after a word boundary and before a vowel. Word boundary and a vowel, which we represent with a big V. And then here down at the bottom, we can see that they exist between 2 vowels. So in other phonology problems, we would look for a lot of other different features, things like voicing, aspiration, and there are a lot of others that a phonologist would look at. For our test and for our problems, the only ones you will need to look at are word boundaries and is it a consonant or a vowel. So now let's look at ol, see if there's any patterns. I see 3 examples where it appears before a word boundary, the end of a word, and oo, ah, and oo and ah, which is, these are 2 of the same example. So we see 2 examples where they appear before a vowel or after a vowel and before a word, the end of a word. And then I see 3 more examples where it appears after a vowel and before a consonant. So now I need to look at these patterns that I've noticed and see if there's anything that explains all of the and ol sounds. And I can see 2 things. I can see that tends to appear before a vowel, Sometimes it's between two, sometimes it's at the beginning of a word. And I see that ul appears after a vowel, sometimes before the end of a word, and sometimes before a consonant. So we can say that ul appears after a vowel, and appears before a vowel. So now the next step in most problems is to figure out which one is the phoneme and which one is the allophone. In some problems, it's nice and easy because one sound will have no pattern to it. It will appear in all environments, and one sound will have a predictable pattern. This problem is not that easy. So we need to go back and we need to look at our data here. On your test, you're not going to see a problem like this. You will see a problem that is more clear-cut and easy like that. But let's say we were looking at this one, and a linguist is looking at this. One thing they might do is they would go and collect more data to figure out, can they find an example of some words that would show which one is the phoneme. But for you guys, you don't have the ability to do that unless you guys speak Korean. But if you are really keenly noticing, you can see that in these words where appears at the beginning of a word, there are always words like ruby or words like radio. And these ones are English loanwords, so they're trying to imitate the phonology of the sound of the original language that these words come from. I would not expect you to recognize that on a test, but generally speaking, if you know about the Hangul writing system, for some of you guys that speak Korean and enjoy Korean, you would know that the sounds usually only appears between two vowels or at the end of a word. So for this problem, I would expect you guys to just, if this was on the test, which it won't be, I would expect you guys to go in and just recognize that there need to be two rules to explain the sounds. And I wouldn't really be picky on which one you choose as the phoneme. So remembering, now we need to write the rule in phonological notation. So we start with the phoneme always, whichever one you want to pick. So for this one, I will pick So here I see there's two rules that explain this. So I start with the phoneme. Phoneme becomes, so the mental sound inside of the speaker's mind, becomes the allophone ul. The allophone ul. In the environment of, so we put the slash in the environment of after a vowel. After a vowel. So mentally, the mental sound is the sound, at least as explained by my rule, and that becomes ul in any time it comes after a vowel. So then the other rule would explain the sound based on our data, and we're going to pick this unifying feature here, that the phoneme becomes the allophone in the environment of before a vowel. So what does this mean? Based on this rule, based on this data, what conclusion can we draw? What we are saying is that mentally the sound is and it is realized. So remember, an allophone is a realization, what actually becomes real from our mind when we are speaking. That it is realized as the sound ol every time after a vowel, and before a vowel, it's realized as the sound. They never appear in the same place. They don't create a difference in meaning. They just change. This mental sound changes into one or the other depending on where the vowels around it are. And that's what we're saying here. So we are going to explain it more simply in plain English, what I ask you to do. And that is basically going to be to say what each rule means just in simple, plain English words. So all you need to say is that phoneme becomes, and that's that arrow, meaning becomes, allophone, ol, the slash means in the environment of, after a vowel. And then you would do the same for the next rule. Phoneme becomes allophone in the environment of before a vowel. So again, this process is the actual science of linguistics. This is where and gotta be precise on my notation, gotta include the brackets, but this is where these rules come from and that we have talked about in class, is this process. We started off with a question about the distribution of and ol in Korean, and we collected some data. We looked at that data. We went through a process of analyzing it, and then we reached a conclusion. Here, the phoneme, the mental sound, changes to ol after a vowel, and it changes to before a vowel. Now, it's worth noting that this is a lot more difficult than the phonemic analysis problems that you will see on your test. But it is important to be able to go through this entire process and follow these steps. If you're able to do that, if you were able to get even only one of these rules in your own practice, then you are more than well prepared for this test. If not, I hope that this step helped clear that up for you. So now that we have finished Korean, let's look ahead at Tojolabal. Jump ahead to example number 6. We have 2 from this language. It is an indigenous language spoken in Chiapas, Mexico. And in number 6, we are looking at 2 sounds. This is it is called an ejective, so it makes that sound. And then we have the k that we are all familiar with from English. So I've gone ahead and I have listed all of the environments here. I may have missed a couple, but as you will see, we've gotten all of the essential ones in just a moment. So as we look here, going through each example, finding the environments. So remember, starting with one letter, with one sound. So starting with k, looking for all the k's, all the environments, listing all of the words and sounds, all of the words and the sounds that they appear in, and then moving on and going to the adjective and finding the environments for those. So now, once you have done that, there is that first question that you ask. Are there any minimal pairs? Now, here, we are lucky. We have found a couple of minimal pairs, nice and easy here to find, hopefully. So if you made it that far, nice work. We're going to start. And so the words that have the minimal pairs, they are, remember, a minimal pair is 2 words with a different meaning. And the only difference is the 2 sounds that you're looking at in the same environment. So For example, we have kissim, my beard, meaning my beard, and then we have kishin, which means warm. Both k and k in this sound appear at the beginning of a word, so between a word boundary, here between a word boundary that we represent with a hashtag, and e. So so we have here we see the two different sounds existing in exactly the same environment. And again, we can see that again here. We can see with the word sak, meaning white, and ak, meaning read, that it exists between an and a word boundary. So right there and right there. So we can go ahead and we can, when you guys are doing this problem on your own, on your test, I want you guys to make sure that you clearly identify the minimal pairs. So putting a star, or maybe numbering them, so I could maybe number kissim and kishin, 1 and then 2 and 2, showing me that you can recognize where the minimal pairs are. These two sounds that have the same, these two different words with different meanings that have the same sound in exactly the same environment. And then go ahead and then circle the environments that you see that are the same. You have k, and then you have this between the word boundary and e, then you have k between word boundary and e there. Here we have and word boundary, and and word boundary. So again, there we can see that we have the same sound existing in the same environment in two words with completely different meanings. So we know that this means that these are in contrastive distribution. So contrastive distribution, remember, means that the two sounds can exist in the same environment and create a difference in meaning. So when it's contrastive distribution, we know that they must be different phonemes. They must be different phonemes in this language. Again, contrastive distribution means that they must be two separate phonemes. So that the phonemes and the phonemes are distinguished meaning. They create a difference in meaning in the minds of the speakers. Kind of like kai and gai in Thai. Aspirated and unaspirated K. So the phonological rule. You'll get to this part of your test. Let's imagine that this was on your test. And you find two phonemes in contrastive distribution, and you get to what is the phonological rule that predicts the appearance of k and k. Well, in this case, you need to remember that phonological rules predict the appearance of allophones of the same phoneme. Here, you would just need to tell me there is no rule. They are different phonemes. You would need to be able to show me clearly on the exam that you know that there is no rule for these two kinds of sounds, and you would need to tell me why. And so, what does that mean? There are different phonemes. What exactly does that mean? You would need to just say that to me again in plain English. You would explain how you know that they are different phonemes and what that means. So you can say that these two sounds and k are in contrastive distribution as seen in the minimal pairs. And you don't need to write down which ones. If you'd like to, you may. So you say that they're in contrastive distribution as seen in the minimal pairs. Therefore, they create a difference in meaning in Tojolabal. So that is what you would need to show me in a problem like this, that you can recognize minimal pairs, you know what minimal pairs mean, that it means contrastive distribution, you know what contrastive distribution means, and you can explain to me in all of these steps. Okay? So now we will move forward and jump ahead to the next Tojolabal example. Now, these are close to similar to what you might see on your test. The one thing that you would not see on your test that makes this one a little bit more difficult than what you might see on the test is that you should be able to know from your IPA charts that we've seen that you have, that this sound here, that in Chitam, and let's draw that here, that this sound there is not, that T that you see, that is not a T. That is not the voiceless alveolar stop. That is an affricate. That is an affricate part of the voiceless palatal affricate. So you would not include that T in your list. You would need to know that and show me that. But again, that is still going to be more difficult than your test. So hopefully you recognize that as you do this example. If so, you're in really good shape. But now, and then remember, this is the aspirated T. So you would need to know that. The one thing that makes this more difficult than why I would not put this on a test is we did not talk about adjectives because this is English linguistics and we don't have adjectives in English linguistics. And that would make it confusing knowing, do you need to include that or not? So again, that is, if you were able to recognize that that is a different sound, you are awesome. But if you did not, that was something that you struggled with, don't worry. You are not going to be expected to know that for points on an exam. Now, so now what I've done here is I've gone through all of the environments that you see the sound, the voiceless alveolar stop. So we have between E and ah and k and o. And then we have all of the ones for the all of the different environments for the aspirated T. So between ah and a word boundary, ah and a word boundary, oo and a word boundary, and then again ah and a word boundary. So we have 3 times that it appears in this environment. Now, so the first question that we ask is, are there any minimal pairs? So looking here, looking at our list, we do not see any time that these 2 sounds show up in the same environment. So we know, going down, we know because that there are no minimal pairs, we never see them appear in the same environment, that they must be in complementary distribution. Complementary. So remembering our superhero metaphor for phonemes and allophones, it's just like imagine you're Lex Luthor or the Joker trying to find the identity of Batman. If you never see Clark Kent in the same place as Superman, every time Clark Kent was there and the crime happens, suddenly he disappears. That is remember, complementary distribution. We never see them in the same place, so they might be the same person. So complementary distribution, and we know therefore that if they're in complementary distribution, they must be allophones or the same phoneme, at least for our problems that we'll see in class and on our exams. So now we must, because there are allophones of the same phoneme, we need to make a rule looking at our data and predict when we will see one sound or the other. When do we see the voiceless alveolar stop? And when do we see the voiceless, the aspirated voiceless alveolar stop right here in Tojolabal? So remember, in English, it appears at the beginning. Wonder if it's the same here in this language. Let's go ahead and find out. So we go back to our data to find out. We go back to our data and to our analysis of that data. And we look to see if we have anything in common here. So here we see that in these two cases right here, it's between a vowel and another vowel, a vowel and another vowel. Again, there are lots of other features we can look at beyond just vowel and consonant, but for our problems, that's what we're going to focus on. So again, consonant, vowel, again, so that changes things up a bit, and now we have vowel, vowel, and then I have a word boundary and a vowel. Okay. And then here, in all of these different examples, we had 4 times that the sound appeared. It always appeared between a vowel and the end of a word. So, now when we're looking at this data here and we're trying to decide which is the phoneme, remember, just like if we are superhero hunters, if we're the Joker and we are trying to find out which is the costume, Bruce Wayne or Batman, who is the real person and who is the costume, we would look at who appears in a variety of environments. So Bruce Wayne appears everywhere and Batman appears only in crime. So just like with that, in this case, we see t appear in all kinds of environments between 2 vowels, consonant in a vowel, word boundary in a vowel. And so we know that based on our data, at least, that t is going to be the phoneme, and that this one always appears consistently in that same environment of between a vowel and the end of a word. So we can predict when we will see this. If we learned a new word in phonemic transcription for this language, we could guess that it would probably be pronounced this way. Now, you might notice that all of these are in front of a vowel. So it is possible that that there is another sound that exists that would exist in front of a consonant, just kind of like in our Korean example. However, we don't know that. We don't have any data that proves that, so we would not want to make a rule for that. But we clearly have some data here that proves that this gets aspirated before this in the environment of between a vowel and a word boundary. So hopping on down, we go to what is the phonological rule that predicts the appearance. So again, we always start with our phoneme. The phoneme t becomes the allophone using brackets, the aspirated T. So we are saying that this becomes aspirated in the environment of, so that is with a single slash, between a vowel and the end of a word, between the vowel and the end of a word. So now, on a test, I would now expect you to show me that you know what that means. Phoneme becomes allophone, in the environment of between a vowel and the end of a word boundary. You don't have to use the exact wording. You can just say that phoneme T becomes allophone T, or phoneme T becomes aspirated in the environment. So this is what I would expect you to be able to show me on your. We've finished our problems. We looked at Korean in 2 examples from Tojolabal from your practice sheet. And let's talk about what we found, what that means. So for Korean, although we looked at the data and we found that there were no minimal pairs, they never existed in the same environment. So we looked for some patterns to figure out when Korean speakers produce an sound or when they produce an sound. We weren't sure what the phoneme was, but we were fairly certain based on our data that always appears before a vowel, just like in the loan word ruby and in the native word saram. And then we found that ul appears appears right after a vowel. So like in the word mul, meaning water. So then we moved on to the next problem. And so we created those two rules, and then we moved on to Tojolabal, where we found some different stuff. We looked at the adjective and the adjective k and the normal k that we see that is normal to us in English and other languages that don't have an adjective. And then we looked and we found minimal pairs between the two, knowing that. So we know, therefore, that they create a difference in meaning. Here now, at the end, we looked at one more Tojolabal problem, and we found that the unaspirated T becomes aspirated in the environment of between a vowel and the end of a word. It would be possible that maybe as we look at more data in each of these languages, we can find more precise rules. But these are some good rules that we can find out about Tojolabal and Korean. Now I know some of you guys are able to speak Korean, and I'm willing to bet some good money that none of us know how to speak Tojolabal. But this kind of analysis really helps show what linguistics is. It's not learning to speak many languages. It's the scientific study of language, asking a question about different features of a language, whether it's a sound system in phonology or grammar or morphology, as we will talk about after the midterm. Asking questions about it, collecting some data, and doing some analysis to find some things and learn something about a language, whether we speak it or not. So this is phonemic analysis. I hope this really helps you guys on your midterm. Remember, as you guys are doing these practice problems, that these ones are a little bit more difficult than what you will see on your midterm. I'm giving you problems on your midterm that will be a lot more clear and easy and less open to some interpretation. But interpreting data and investigating data is an important skill. And it really is the heart of what phonology is, and linguistics as a whole. So I hope you guys found this helpful. Remember on your test that there will be 2 easy phonemic analysis problems. Some of them might look familiar if you were paying attention in class. And then there will be 1 English phonology problem that is quite difficult. So know that, prepare for that on your test, and do message me on Edmodo if you have any questions. This has been Office Hours, my first ever YouTube video, so apologies if there was anything weird about it, but it's fun, and I really hope it's helpful for you guys. Thanks, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday for the midterm.